The planet Zircon was once beautiful. Now, it is a graveyard of fire, ash, and orange smoke. Commander Croth, the galaxy's greatest warrior, lay broken in the dust, gasping for his final breath. Inside his chest, strange blue lights moved under his skin. He thought it was his soul, but it was a monster. Sergeant Miller knelt over him. He was just a human, but he held the power of life and death in his hands. No, please. Leave them in, the alien cried. They are my soul. Do not take them. Miller looked him in the eye and said, in my world, we don't call these souls. We call them death. The sky of the planet Zircon was no longer blue. It was a dark, dirty orange, filled with thick smoke and the smell of burning metal. The great city of the Xylos people was in ruins. Buildings that once touched the clouds were now just piles of broken stone. In the middle of this destruction, lay a warrior who was once feared by everyone in the galaxy. Commander Croth was a giant. He stood 7 feet tall, with skin like hard gray rock and 4 powerful arms. He was the leader of the Xylos warriors, a race known for their strength and pride. But now, Croth was not strong. He was on the ground, coughing and shaking. His heavy armor was cracked, and his breathing was fast and shallow. But it wasn't the wounds from the battle that were killing him. It was something inside him. Under the skin of his chest, something was moving. There were 3 distinct, glowing blue lumps. They moved like snakes under his skin, pulsing with a strange, eerie light. Every time they moved, Croth gasped in a mix of pain and a strange, terrifying joy. Standing over him was Sergeant Miller. Miller was a human. Compared to the giant Croth, Miller looked small and fragile. His green camouflage uniform was covered in dust and alien blood. His face was tired, his eyes heavy from days without sleep. But his hands were steady. He wasn't looking at the fire around them. He was looking at Croth's chest. Miller reached into his medical pack. He pulled out 2 things, a sharp, vibrating combat knife and a small, red medical laser. No. Croth hissed. His voice was weak, but his eyes were wide with fear. He tried to push Miller away with one of his secondary arms, but he was too weak. No, Miller. Please. Do not touch them. Leave them in. Miller didn't stop. He checked the battery on his laser. Croth, you're dying, Miller said. His voice was calm, almost cold. If I don't take those things out of you in the next 10 minutes, there won't be enough of you left to bury. You do not understand. Croth cried out. A tear of purple blood ran down his face. These are the glow spirits. They are my ancestors. They are my soul. Our priests told us that when the glow comes, we are chosen for greatness. If you take them, you kill my spirit. You will make me empty. The glowing lumps in Croth's chest pulsed brighter. They seemed to react to his voice. They began to spin faster, and Croth's skin started to turn a sickly, glowing blue. He wasn't just in pain, he was being consumed. Miller knelt down on the dusty ground, pinning Croth's shoulder with his knee. He looked the alien warrior straight in the eye. Listen to me, Croth, Miller said, his voice low and serious. I've seen this soul on 3 other planets. I saw what it did to the Drax warriors. They thought it was a gift, too. They thought they were becoming gods. But do you know what happened? 2 days later, there were no gods. There were only empty shells of skin, and thousands of these blue worms crawling out of their mouths to find a new home. Croth shook his head, his teeth grinding together. No, it is a blessing. I feel the power. That's not power, Miller snapped. That's a chemical. It's a drug the parasite uses to make you stay still while it eats your heart. In your world, you call these souls. You pray to them. You think they are the light of your people. Miller turned on the medical laser. The red beam sizzled in the smoky air. He held the knife in his other hand. But in my world, Miller continued, his eyes turning hard as steel, we don't call these souls. We don't pray to them. We call them death. And as a human soldier, my job is to fight death, even if I have to cut it out of my friend. No. Croth screamed. It was a sound of pure agony and terror. But Miller didn't hesitate. He pressed the laser against Croth's chest. The smell of burning skin filled the air. The glowing lumps beneath the surface began to hiss. They weren't just lights anymore. They were alive. They started to fight back, moving wildly under the skin, trying to escape the heat of the laser. Croth's body arched off the ground. His 4 hands clawed at the dirt. The ground around him shook as he struggled. To any other alien race, this would look like murder. It looked like a human was tortured a legendary warrior. But Miller didn't let go. He kept his weight on Croth, his hands moving with the precision of a clockmaker. He had to be fast. If he cut too deep, Croth would bleed out. If he was too slow, the parasites would release a toxin that would kill them both. Stay with me, big guy, Miller whispered through his teeth, sweat dripping from his forehead. Don't let the light take you. Fight it. Outside the circle of fire, the sounds of the enemy were getting closer. The creatures that had brought this glow to the planet were coming to claim their harvest. They wanted the souls. They wanted Croth. Miller looked up for a split second, seeing the shadows moving in the smoke. He had no backup. He had no heavy weapons. He only had a knife, a laser, and the stubborn human will to save a life that didn't want to be saved. The audience is left wondering, what are these glowing creatures? Why is the human the only one who knows the truth? And can Miller finish the surgery before the enemy arrives or before Croth's soul kills him from the inside? The red laser cut through Croth's thick, gray skin with a loud hissing sound. As the wound opened, it didn't look like a normal injury. Instead of just blood, a thick, glowing blue liquid began to leak out. It smelled like burnt sugar and old chemicals. This was the ichor of the parasites, the fluid they used to take over the mind of their host. Miller had to cover his nose with his sleeve because the smell was so strong it made his head spin. He knew that if he breathed in too much of this gas, he might start seeing hallucinations, just like Croth. The parasites were smart, they used every trick to stay inside their home. As Miller worked, the ground beneath them began to vibrate. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the rhythmic thumping of heavy feet. From the thick orange smoke, tall and thin shadows began to appear. These were the Harvesters, a robotic and cold race of aliens who served the parasites. They didn't speak, and they didn't show mercy. They moved like giant spiders through the ruins, searching for any glow signals. To the Harvesters, Croth was not a person, he was just a container for their precious crop. Miller looked at his motion tracker. The red dots were moving fast. He had less than 5 minutes before the Harvesters found their hiding spot. Croth's body began to twist in a terrifying way. One of the glowing lumps moved from his chest up toward his throat. It looked like a large, pulsing heart trying to jump out of his neck. Croth's eyes turned completely white, and he started speaking in a voice that didn't sound like his own. He spoke in 1,000 voices at once, whispering ancient secrets and beautiful lies. This was the shadow of the parasite. It was trying to convince Croth to kill Miller. The parasite was telling the warrior that the human was a demon who wanted to steal his light. Croth's huge hand reached out and grabbed Miller's throat, squeezing with enough power to crush a steel pipe. Miller couldn't breathe. His face turned red, and his vision began to blur. But he didn't use his gun. He knew that if he killed Croth, the parasites would win. Instead, Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass vial filled with a clear, salty liquid, simple human saline mixed with a special chemical. He slammed the needle into Croth's arm. This isn't a soul. Miller choked out, fighting for air. The chemical was a dead zone serum. It didn't hurt the alien, but it made the alien's blood taste like poison to the parasite. Suddenly, the glowing lumps inside Croth let out a high-pitched scream. It was a sound so sharp that it shattered the glass of the nearby broken windows. Croth's grip loosened, and he fell back, gasping. The blue light under his skin began to flicker and turn a dull, ugly gray. The parasite was panicked. For thousands of years, these creatures had traveled from planet to planet. They would find a race, tell them they were gods, and live inside them until the race was extinct. Every other alien race in the galaxy had fallen for the trick because they were too afraid to look under the skin. They saw magic because they didn't want to see the monster, but humans were different. Humans didn't care about gods who lived in blood. When humans first met the glow, they didn't build temples. They built microscopes. They didn't offer prayers, they performed autopsies. The human scientists found that the glow was actually a hive mind of tiny worms that used electricity to control the brain. While the rest of the galaxy was worshipping their own death, humans were in their labs, figuring out how to kill the divine light. This made humans the most hated race in the galaxy, and the only one that could save it. The harvesters were now only 100 yards away. Their red scanning eyes were cutting through the smoke, searching for the blue light of Croth's soul. Miller knew that if the harvesters saw the blue light, they would capture Croth and take him to their hives, where he would suffer forever. Miller had to finish the extraction now. He took his knife and made a deep, fast cut right into the center of the largest glowing lump. The parasite inside didn't like being touched. It coiled around Miller's knife, trying to pull it out of his hand. Miller's hands were shaking from the cold and the fear, but his mind was focused. He remembered his training back on Earth. Life is worth more than a lie, his commander had told him. He looked at Croth, who was now crying purple tears. The warrior was caught between two worlds, one world where he was a chosen hero of the gods, and the real world where he was a dying man on a dirty planet. Miller reached his fingers, protected by thin medical gloves, directly into the open wound. He felt something cold, slimy, and vibrating. "I've got you," Miller whispered, his voice shaking. He pulled with all his strength. The parasite held on to Croth's ribs, its tiny hooks digging deep. The tension was so high that it felt like something was going to snap. Just then, a loud metallic clang echoed through the ruins. A harvester had stepped onto a piece of metal just 10 feet away. It stopped, its red eye turning toward the corner where Miller and Croth were hiding. The suspense was unbearable. If Miller pulled too hard, he might kill Croth. If he stayed still, the harvester would kill them both. Miller looked at the blue light in his hand, then at the red eye of the machine. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it in 1 second. The harvester's red eye searched the dark corner, its mechanical legs clicking against the broken stone like a giant metal insect. Miller held his breath, his heart drumming against his ribs. He was still holding the slimy, vibrating parasite inside Croth's chest. The blue glow of the creature was like a bright lantern in the dark. If the harvester saw that light, it was over. In a moment of pure, human madness, Miller did something no other alien would ever think to do. Instead of running or shooting, he grabbed a handful of thick, black mud and oily soot from the ground and smeared it directly over the glowing wound in his own hands. He buried the holy light under a layer of common dirt. The glow dimmed, hidden by the filth. The harvester stopped just 3 feet away. It tilted its head, its sensors confused. It could smell the parasite, but it couldn't see the light. In the silent galaxy, most species relied on advanced sensors and energy signatures. They didn't expect a soldier to use mud and garbage as a cloaking device. Miller stayed perfectly still, even when a drop of cold sweat ran down into his eye. He didn't blink. He watched the machine's red eye pass over him. For a few seconds, the world felt frozen. Then, the harvester made a low clicking sound and turned away, moving toward a different pile of rubble. It thought the signal was just a ghost in the smoke. But the danger was far from over. Inside the wound, the parasite was angry. It didn't like being covered in mud, and it didn't like the dead zone chemical Miller had injected earlier. It began to bite. Croth's body jerked, his eyes rolling back. He was trying to scream, but Miller quickly covered the alien's mouth with his muddy hand. "Don't you dare," Miller whispered into Croth's ear. "If you make a sound, that machine comes back, and we both become food. Fight the pain, Croth. Be a warrior, not a host." The alien's eyes cleared for a second, showing a spark of his old strength. He bit his lip so hard it bled, forcing himself to stay silent while Miller reached back into the open chest. The parasite was now wrapped around Croth's spinal cord. It was a delicate and deadly situation. If Miller pulled too fast, he would paralyze his friend. If he was too slow, the parasite would release a burst of electricity that would fry Croth's brain. Other races called this the God's Lock, believing that once the glow touched the spine, it was a permanent soul bond. They thought it was impossible to remove. But humans didn't believe in impossible. Miller pulled out a small, vibrating tool, a sonic pulse hummer. It was a simple tool used by human mechanics to loosen rusty bolts on old spaceships. Miller pressed the vibrating tool against the parasite's head. The high-frequency vibration was like a scream to the tiny creature. It hated the noise. It began to uncoil, its many tiny legs letting go of the bone one by one. This was the madness the galaxy talked about. Humans used industrial tools and loud noises to fight biological gods. As the creature loosened its grip, Miller felt a rush of adrenaline. He gripped the parasite's main body with his gloved hand. It felt like holding a bag of angry snakes. He began to pull it out, inch by inch. The skin on Croth's chest stretched and groaned. Just as the parasite was halfway out, a loud alarm rang out across the ruins. The harvester had found a discarded piece of Miller's medical gear. It realized it had been tricked. The machine let out a terrifying, metallic shriek, signaling all other harvesters in the area to join the hunt. From the smoke, 4 more red eyes appeared. They were coming back, and this time, they weren't just scanning, they were charging. They realized a human was interfering with the harvest, and in their programming, humans were a virus that needed to be deleted immediately. Miller looked at the charging machines and then at the half-removed parasite. He was out of time. He couldn't do a clean surgery anymore. He looked at Croth and saw the alien's 4 arms shaking in terror. "Miller, go." Croth gasped, his voice returning. "Leave me. They will kill you." Miller just gritted his teeth and wrapped the parasite's tail around his own wrist to get a better grip. "I didn't come this far to go home empty-handed," Miller growled. He planted his boots firmly in the dirt, leaned back, and used his entire body weight to rip the creature out. With a disgusting pop sound, the parasite was torn free. It flew through the air, landing in the dirt, writhing and glowing with a furious blue light. Croth let out one final, silent gasp and went limp, his body finally free of the infection. But now, the glowing parasite was sitting in the open, acting like a beacon. The harvesters screamed again, their metal legs moving like pistons as they sprinted toward Miller. They were only 20 feet away, their sharp claws ready to tear the human apart. Miller grabbed his pulse rifle with one hand and Croth's heavy collar with the other. The human madness was about to reach a whole new level. The harvesters were no longer hiding. They burst through the wall of smoke like metal nightmares. Their long, silver legs stabbed into the ground with enough force to crack stone. Miller didn't have time to pick up Croth and run. The alien warrior was too heavy, and his chest was still an open, bleeding mess. Miller grabbed his pulse rifle and fired a burst of blue energy at the leading harvester. The shots hit the machine's sensor, sending sparks flying everywhere. The machine stumbled, but it didn't stop. These things weren't built to feel pain, they were built to collect the glow, and they were angry that Miller had touched their prize. While firing his rifle with his right hand, Miller used his left hand to grab a pressurized medical foam canister from his belt. This was a human invention, a quick seal spray used to stop internal bleeding in seconds. He sprayed the thick, gray foam into Kroth's open chest. The foam expanded instantly, hissing as it touched the alien's purple blood. It was a messy, ugly way to save a life, but it was the only way to keep Kroth's organs from falling out while the battle raged around them. Kroth let out a low moan, his body twitching as the chemical foam hardened. He was barely hanging on to life, his spirit floating in a dark place between the real world and the parasite's lies. But then, the situation got worse. The parasite Miller had ripped out was not dead. It lay in the dirt, its glowing body pulsing with a rhythmic, angry light. Suddenly, it sprouted hundreds of tiny, hair-like legs and began to crawl. It didn't crawl away, it crawled toward Miller's boot. It wanted a new host. It wanted to jump from the alien to the human. Miller saw it out of the corner of his eye and kicked it away, but the movement cost him his aim. A second harvester swung its heavy metal arm, hitting Miller across the shoulder. The human flew backward, hitting a ruined wall with a sickening thud. His rifle slid across the floor, out of reach. Miller's vision went black for a second. His shoulder felt like it was on fire. He could hear the clicking of the harvester's legs as it walked toward him, its red eye glowing with a murderous light. The machine stood over him, raising a sharp, blade-like leg to finish him off. Miller reached for his sidearm, but his holster was empty. Just as the blade began to swing down, a massive, gray hand reached out from the shadows and grabbed the harvester's leg. It was Kroth. The alien was barely conscious, but his warrior instincts had woken up. With a roar of pure pain and rage, Kroth used his upper arms to snap the machine's leg like a dry twig. The machine crashed to the ground, and Miller scrambled to his feet. But Kroth had used the last of his energy. His eyes closed, and his massive body went completely still. "Kroth! Stay with me!" Miller yelled, rushing back to the alien's side. He checked for a pulse. There was nothing. The alien's heart, a large, three-chambered organ, had stopped beating. The shock of the parasite removal and the fight had been too much. In the human military, there was a procedure for this, but no one had ever tried it on a Xylos warrior. Their biology was different, their skin was thicker, and their bones were like iron. Miller knew he couldn't use a normal defibrillator. Instead, he did something incredibly dangerous. He grabbed 2 power cells from his discarded pulse rifle. He cracked them open, exposing the raw electrical wires. "This is either going to jumpstart you or turn us both into charcoal," Miller muttered. He pressed the live wires against Kroth's chest, right where the foam was still hardening. He counted to 3 and touched the wires together. A massive blue spark exploded between them. The smell of ozone and burnt hair filled the air. Kroth's huge body jumped off the ground, his muscles locking up from the electricity. Nothing happened. Kroth stayed still. Miller didn't give up. He balled his fist and began to hit Kroth's chest with all his might, a human, precordial thump. Each strike sounded like a hammer hitting a drum. Thump. 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 "Come on, you big idiot!" Miller screamed. "Don't die for a worm. Breathe." Outside the ruins, the sky began to turn a bright, blinding white. The Harvester mothership was descending from the clouds, preparing to glass the entire area to destroy the human infection. Miller was running out of oxygen, running out of time, and his only friend was a dead giant. Then, suddenly, a tiny flicker of light appeared in Kroth's eyes. It wasn't the blue light of the parasite. It was the natural, golden glow of his own species. Kroth's chest surged as he took a massive, gasping breath. He coughed up a glob of black fluid, his lungs finally working again. He looked at Miller, his vision blurry. Miller slumped back against the wall, covered in dirt, blood, and sweat. He started to laugh, a tired, crazy human laugh. They were still trapped, the enemy was everywhere, and they were probably going to die in the next 5 minutes. But for the first time in 1,000 years, a Xylos warrior was breathing his own air, free from the gods of the dark. Croth sat on the ground, his massive chest heaving as he took his first clean breaths in years. For a long time, there had been a constant buzzing in the back of his mind, a sweet, singing voice that told him he was a hero. Now, that voice was gone. The silence in his head was terrifying but beautiful. He looked down at the dirt where the parasite lay. Without the protection of a host, the creature looked pathetic. It was a gray, slimy worm with too many legs, writhing in the dust. This. Croth whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. This was my god. This was the spirit of my ancestors. He felt a deep, cold shame. He had spent his whole life protecting a lie, believing that this parasite was the source of his honor. Miller leaned against a piece of broken concrete, wiping the purple blood from his hands. It's a biological trick, Croth, Miller said quietly. They find a species that is strong and proud, like yours. They give you a little bit of extra energy and some happy chemicals in your brain. It makes you feel like a king. But while you're feeling like a king, they are slowly eating your nervous system. They don't want warriors, they want containers. Miller looked up at the sky. The thick orange smoke was being pushed away by a massive shadow. The Harvester mothership was descending. It was a giant, black sphere, miles wide, with no windows or lights, only a single, pulsating red eye at the bottom that was larger than a city block. As the mothership came closer, the harvesters in the ruins began to change. They stopped their erratic clicking and stood perfectly still, their red eyes all pointing toward Miller and Croth. Now that Croth's mind was clear, he saw something he had never noticed before. He looked at the nearest harvester, which was standing just 20 feet away. Through the gaps in its rusted metal armor, he saw dried-out skin and white bones. Miller. Croth gasped, his eyes wide with horror. That armor, those are Xylos markings. That machine is wearing the body of a Xylos high guard. Miller nodded grimly. That's the part your priests never told you. The harvesters aren't a different race. They are the blessed ones who came before you. Once a warrior is completely consumed by the glow, the mothership comes to ascend them. They take your body, put it inside a metal suit, and turn you into a slave for the next harvest. They've been doing this to the galaxy for millions of years. Every god your people worshipped is just a pilot for those machines. Croth fell to his knees. His entire history, his family's legacy, and his people's religion were all just a factory for making organic robots. The heaven they were promised was just a metal cage. The red eye of the mothership began to glow brighter, turning from dark red to a blinding, angry white. The air around them began to hum with heat. They're charging the beam, Miller said, his voice urgent. They realize the infection isn't spreading because of us. They're going to glass this entire area. They'd rather burn the whole city than let a human show the galaxy the truth. Miller reached into his tattered backpack and pulled out a small, black device. It looked like a simple radio with a heavy battery pack attached. It didn't look like a weapon that could fight a city-sized ship, but Miller held it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. What is that? Croth asked, standing up and shaking off his despair. If his life had been a lie, he would spend his final moments fighting for the truth. Miller looked at the device. This is a scream generator. Human scientists figured out that these parasites communicate using a specific frequency. This box sends out a signal that sounds like a predator to them. It doesn't kill them, but it causes them to panic. If I can get this signal into the mothership's communication array, it will cause every parasite in this sector to go insane. The harvesters will start attacking each other, and the mothership's brain will melt. However, there was a catch. Miller pointed to the tallest building left standing, a jagged, burning needle of steel and glass that reached high into the smoke. The signal is too weak from the ground. I have to get this box to the very top of that tower to bypass their jamming field. He looked at the hundreds of harvesters now closing the circle around them. They were trapped. Between them and the tower was a small army of metal-clad corpses. The human madness was back in Miller's eyes. He wasn't afraid, he was calculating. Croft looked at the tower, then at the small human soldier. For the first time, he didn't see a weak, small creature. He saw a race that refused to be lied to, a race that looked at the gods and saw a problem to be solved. Croft picked up a heavy metal beam from the rubble, swinging it like a club with his 4 powerful arms. "You humans are very loud, Sergeant Miller," Croft said, a fierce warrior's smile returning to his face. "If you want to make the galaxy scream, then I will make sure you reach the roof." The mothership's beam let out a low, bass roar, and the first wave of harvesters began to sprint toward them. The climb up the shattered tower was a journey through hell. Every floor was crawling with harvesters, their metal limbs clashing against the stone. Croft moved like a whirlwind of gray muscle and rage. He used his 4 arms to grab harvesters and throw them off the ledges, clearing a path for Miller. But Miller was struggling. The human madness that had pushed him this far was starting to fade into pure physical exhaustion. His shoulder was broken, his ribs were cracked, and the air was getting thinner and hotter as the mothership's beam prepared to fire. Every step felt like a mile, but Miller kept his eyes locked on the roof. He wasn't just carrying a black box, he was carrying the only chance for the galaxy to wake up from a million-year nightmare. When they finally burst onto the roof, the heat was unbearable. The sky above them was no longer orange, it was a blinding, pulsating white. The mothership was directly overhead, looking like a dark moon. The red eye at its center was wide open, humming with the power of 1,000 suns. In 60 seconds, the beam would hit, and everything within 50 miles would be turned into liquid glass. Miller stumbled toward the edge of the roof, where a large communication satellite stood. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely plug the screen generator into the tower's transmitter. "Just one more second," Miller hissed through his teeth, blood dripping from his lip onto the black box. Suddenly, a massive harvester, larger and faster than the others, jumped onto the roof. It was the Alpha, a commander of the parasite swarm. It didn't attack with claws, it used a psychic wave of pure terror. Croft fell to his knees, clutching his head as the parasite inside the machine tried to reconnect with his mind. "Return to us, child," 1,000 voices whispered in Croft's brain. "Humanity is a disease. Return to the light." Croft screamed in agony, his golden eyes flickering back to blue. But Miller didn't look back. He didn't have a psychic shield. He only had his human stubbornness. He slammed the final cable into the port and hit the on switch with the palm of his hand. For a moment, there was a deafening silence. Then, a sound that wasn't a sound, a vibration that felt like a needle stabbing into the brain, exploded from the tower. The scream generator was working. It sent a high-frequency pulse directly into the mothership's communication web. It was the sound of a parasite's worst nightmare. Across the planet, every glowing parasite began to thrash in pain. Inside the harvester machines, the worms started eating their own metal suits in a blind panic. The Alpha on the roof let out a mechanical shriek and fell over the side of the building, its red eye flickering out like a dying candle. Above them, the mothership's glassing beam didn't fire. Instead, the white light turned into a chaotic mess of sparks and explosions. That scream had caused a massive feedback loop in the ship's brain. The giant black sphere began to tilt, its engines failing one by one. The gods were no longer singing, they were dying. Croft stood up, the blue light gone from his eyes forever. He looked up at the falling ship and then at Miller. The small human soldier had done it. He hadn't used a massive bomb or a fleet of ships, he had used a small box and a frequency that the gods were too arrogant to prepare for. As the mothership crashed into the distant ocean, causing a wave of steam to rise into the sky, a fleet of human dropships finally broke through the clouds. They were painted in the blue and white colors of the Terran Rescue Corps. They didn't come to conquer, they came to heal. As the first ship landed on the roof, human medics rushed out with scanners and medicine. They didn't see an alien warrior, or a god, they saw a victim who needed help. They treated Croth with the same care they gave Miller. This was the true, humanity fuck yeah, moment, not just the winning of a war, but the refusal to leave anyone behind. Before they were lifted into the rescue ship, Croth grabbed Miller's hand. The giant warrior looked at the small soldier with a respect that no priest had ever earned. Why? Croth asked, his voice full of wonder. The galaxy hated you. My people called you demons. We tried to kill you. Why did you stay to save me? Miller sat on the edge of the transport ship, a medic wrapping a thermal blanket around his shoulders. He looked out at the ruins of the city, where the smoke was finally starting to clear, revealing a real sun for the first time in centuries. Miller took a deep breath of the cold, fresh air and looked at Croth with a tired smile. Because, Croth, Miller said quietly, humans have a very simple rule. We don't like it when someone tells us what to think. And we really don't like it when someone hurts our friends and calls it a blessing. You call us crazy, you call us madness, but at the end of the day, we're just the ones who refuse to let the dark win. The dropship lifted off, carrying the last free warrior of Zircon and the human who had broken a million-year curse. The galaxy was finally silent, and for the first time, that silence was beautiful.